It was reassuring to see a orderly transition of power of the government of the United States today, respecting the democratic decisions of the American people, the rule of law, and the Constitution of the United States. The world needs a strong American democracy, and today we saw the strength of the institutions that protect American democracy. The United States, of course, is our most important ally and trading partner. And amongst all of the Canadian provinces, Alberta has the deepest economic ties to the United States and strong social connections that go back well over a century. I wish the new administration and the people of the United States every success in the coming years. With over $100 billion worth of exports to the United States every year, Alberta has a broad range of important issues to work on to create prosperity for people on both sides of the border. But as friends and allies of the United States, we are deeply disturbed that one of President Biden's first actions in office has been to rescind the presidential permit for the Keystone XL pipeline border crossing. This is a gut punch for the Canadian and Alberta economies. Sadly, it is an insult directed at the United States' most important ally and trading partner on day one of a new administration. Today, as I speak, over 2,000 women and men have lost their jobs or are heading home from good-paying union jobs as a result of this decision. My thoughts go to every one of them as they cope with the distressing consequences of today's decision. We'll continue to fight for them and for the 59,000 jobs that this project would create. Let's be clear about what happened today. The leader of our closest ally retroactively vetoed approval for a pipeline that already exists and which is co-owned by a Canadian government, directly attacking by far the largest part of the Canada-U.S. trade relationship, which is our energy industry and exports. The portion of Keystone XL that crosses the Canada-U.S. border between Montana and Saskatchewan was installed last summer. It was built following a decade of rigorous environmental analysis and approval. Thousands of union workers are being fired as we speak as a result of the decision. This decision was made without even giving Canada the opportunity respectfully to make the case for how Keystone XL would strengthen U.S. national and energy security, how it would bolster both economies, and how our two countries could find a path together on climate and environmental policy. For months, we've been told that the Biden transition team would not communicate with foreign governments on this or other issues. And now a decision has been made without even giving us a chance to communicate formally with the new administration. That's not good faith. In my books, that's not how you treat a friend and an ally. For a friend and an ally, you show respect for your friends and by listening to them and giving them a chance to find common ground. The entire point of this project of Keystone XL is to strengthen the historic Canada-U.S. relationship, building the modern infrastructure for safe, secure future exports of energy to the United States. With that, we could help our friends become less dependent on foreign oil imports, including from hostile OPEC dictatorships, some of which are openly hostile to the United States, and none of which share Canada's commitment to high environmental standards, to global stability, and to human rights. We're being told that this decision was made over concerns about climate policy, but the U.S. State Department's exhaustive analysis that was conducted under President Obama's administration concluded that Keystone XL would actually reduce CO2 emissions, as the alternative will be to move this energy by higher emitting and less secure rail transport. The Canadian oil sands have reduced the carbon intensity of the average barrel of bitumen by about 30% and are on track for even larger reductions. Our oil sands production, our oil sands producers rank at the top of the world in global assessments of environmental, social, and governance standards. Most of these companies have committed to net zero emissions in their operations. The Government of Canada has more ambitious emissions reduction targets than the new U.S. administration, and our provincial government here is investing billions of dollars in the development of emissions reductions technology to further make progress on this important front. In other words, Canada is part of the solution to the energy transition. But today's decision was made without giving Canada the chance to make that case. And what are the things I find so concerning about this? Let me also point out that TC Energy has made tremendous progress in bringing on board First Nations on both sides of the border as potential equity partners, that this project has had enthusiastic support of major U.S. unions, including several that were active supporters of President Biden's campaign. It has the support of all state governments along the pipeline route. And in a large poll recently sponsored by Alberta's government, it indicates 71% of American voters, including a majority of Democrat Party voters, support construction of the Keystone XL project. And that number only goes up when people find out that construction is underway and the border crossing is in place. And so I call upon Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his government to ask the new administration to sit down and to discuss this decision in the context of a way forward between Canada and the United States on environmental policy, climate policy, and energy security. Surely that is the least that our closest friend and ally owes Canada, which is to respectfully discuss this and review the decision in light of all of these and other facts. If, however, the U.S. government refuses to open the door to a constructive and respectful dialogue about these issues, then it is clear that the Government of Canada must impose meaningful trade and economic sanctions in response to defend our country's vital economic interests. Not doing so would be to create a dangerous precedent. And let me be blunt. I believe it was the failure of this federal government to respond with strength to the veto of Keystone XL in 2015, which in part led to today's impasse. I believe that the transition team, the now administration, concluded from the lack of a meaningful response to the 2015 veto that this federal government doesn't really intend to stand up for this country's largest industry. I hope that's not true. I appreciate Prime Minister Trudeau's recent words, expressions of support for this project. But that support is only meaningful if it is followed by action which defends hundreds of thousands of Canadian workers in our country's largest industry, our largest export industry, that is our energy industry. As I say, a failure to act, a failure to respond in a meaningful and direct way will create a dangerous precedent. By far, Canada's largest export to the United States is our energy products, most of which are produced here in Alberta, a value of over $90 billion a year. That's twice the size of auto trade between Canada and the United States. It dwarfs by comparison the aviation sector in Quebec, the aquaculture, fisheries industry trade out of Atlantic Canada, the lumber industry trade out of British Columbia. The largest element of our trading relationship is this energy. And the same political forces that succeeded today in obtaining this retroactive veto are seeking now to kill other critical pipelines that safely deliver Canadian energy to fuel the U.S. economy, including the recent effort by the Governor and Attorney General of Michigan to decommission the Enbridge Line 5 project, which has safely operated for 60 years. If they succeed in doing so, or if they persuade this administration to apply this precedent of retroactively rescinding presidential permits for pipeline border crossings, that would have a devastating impact not only on the energy workers of Western Canada, but on the manufacturing workers and just ordinary families in Southern Ontario who depend on that as their main source of energy. The senior climate policy advisor to now President Biden has openly expressed her opposition to the Line 3 replacement project. And so if there is not a strong and meaningful response to today's decision, I believe that those organizations will move, their next target will be the use of a presidential veto on other pipelines, which would be devastating to the largest industry of Canada's economy, which employs hundreds of thousands of workers. Now, today I was very disappointed to see Foreign Minister Garneau say that we should, quote, understand and respect this decision, to see Ambassador Hillman in Washington say that we should, quote, accept it and move forward, and for the Prime Minister merely to say that he was disappointed. Now, let me compare this to the quite appropriate and strong response of Canada's government to efforts by the last president to undermine Canada's vital economic interests. You'll recall that former President Trump campaigned on ripping up NAFTA. But the Canadian government did not accept that and move forward. They did not understand and respect that decision. They fought it. They fought it quite rightly and strongly for 2 years to negotiate a sound new North American trade agreement. President Trump campaigned on imposing steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs on foreign imports to the United States. That was his campaign commitment. The position of the Trudeau government wasn't to accept that and move forward. It was not to understand that position of tariffs and to respect the decision, as they've said today. It was to fight it. In fact, allow me to, I recall that former Minister of Trade, Chrystia Freeland, had very sharp words for the U.S. government, as did the Prime Minister. Then Foreign Minister Freeland said, quotes, the United States has taken the absurd decision to harm its own people at a time when its economy is suffering its deepest crisis since the Great Depression. Any American who buys a car or a bike will suffer. And she went on to say this was unnecessary, unwarranted, and entirely unacceptable, and that a trade dispute is the last thing anyone needs, but Canada will respond with strength, as it did with countervailing tariffs that got the attention of the American government and caused the policy to be reversed. Surely, hundreds of thousands of energy workers deserve at least as strong a defense from their national government as that government gave to Canadian steel workers in central Canada and elsewhere. So that is what I'm calling on the Trudeau government to do, which is to seek to enter into a respectful dialogue about energy and the environment and how this safe, job-creating project can operate in that context, and failing that, to demonstrate that Canada will stand up for itself against this uncalled-for attack against our country's vital economic interests, and I'm happy to take your questions.
A reminder to callers to please keep your questions brief and limit yourself to one question, as there are many people in the queue. With that said, operator, will you please put through the first caller?
Thank you. Yes, Kelly Kreiderman, Globe and Mail. Kelly, your line is open.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. I'm just wondering if at this juncture, Premier, you have regrets about your investment in the pipeline.
No, absolutely not. I think any responsible Alberta government would have made that decision. Had we not done so, the project would have died last year because of the perceived political risk associated with it. Much like the federal government, took its ownership position in in Trans Mountain at a minimum cost of $7 billion, much like the previous Alberta government risked $3.8 billion only to move, in principle, to move 120,000 barrels a day of crude by rail for only 3 years, an arrangement where we ended up losing several $100 million. This was a $1 billion preferred equity investment to begin construction, to create facts on the ground, as I said at the time, to take control of our own economic destiny in a project which, if completed, will generate, we estimate, $30 billion of incremental revenue for the government of Alberta over the next 2 decades. Our government was elected on a commitment to get pipelines built, to fight for pipelines, to fight against those seeking to landlock Alberta energy. This was one critically important part of that. And Kelly, we've always seen Keystone XL in the broader context of that campaign, that foreign-funded campaign to landlock Alberta energy. As the Michigan governor is in court right now, trying to kill a 60-year-old pipeline that is safely operated, delivering 640,000 barrels of Alberta energy to Michigan, that fuels the Southern Ontario economy. As the same forces seek to block the Enbridge Line 3 project, and the same groups that are trying to stop Trans Mountain. We were not going to surrender to that campaign to landlock Alberta energy. And we will continue to use every legal tool at our disposal to defend our jobs, our future, and our vital economic interests. And that includes, by the way, using any legal remedies available to us to defend our financial interests in this project. I spoke earlier today to TC Energy President Russ Girling about that. Of course, we are going to closely analyze the actual legal wording of today's presidential permit. Of course, I renew our call on the federal government to enter into dialogue with the Biden administration on this. If ultimately those efforts are not successful, we will defend our interests in court as necessary.
Thank you. Operator, will you please put through the next question?
Thank you. Chris Varco, Calgary Herald.
Hi, Premier. I have 2 questions here. I'm wondering, first off, if you can just talk to me about your call for trade sanctions. What specifically are you looking for, and are you worried it's going to lead to retaliation? That's the first question. The second one is you talk about this setting a precedent. Why do you think this puts other pipeline projects at risk? So what sanctions are you calling for, and are you worried about it leading to retaliation? And separately, why do you think that this puts other projects at risk?
Well, in terms of what kind of sanctions, that would be up to the federal government to decide and to calibrate. Professor Jack Mintz outlines a number of creative ideas about what kind of sanctions Canada could meaningfully impose in response. My point, I guess my broader point to you, Chris, is that when you're dealing with a trading partner who attacks your vital interests, in this case, retroactively cancelling critical infrastructure, which is co-owned by a Canadian government, and thereby imposing very real financial, economic, and damage on our country and our province, then a response is called for, because otherwise it invites similar decisions in the future. That is exactly the principle which guided the Trudeau government, quite rightly, to impose countervailing tariffs on U.S. products following the Trump administration's imposition of tariffs on aluminum and steel imports from Canada. So it's clear that today's decision is not in keeping with the spirit of the North American Free Trade Agreement or its successor agreements, and that it's a direct attack on the largest sector of the United States' most important trading partner's economy. And if there is no meaningful response, then that, in a sense, that rewards this action that is a direct attack on the Canadian economy. In terms of I forgot the second part of your question, but again, if you're looking for ideas about what those kinds of sanctions might be, I'd refer you to Professor Mintz's article that I think is a good outline of some of them. Yes, in terms of precedent for other pipelines, that was your second question. So Gina McCarthy, who's the senior policy advisor in the Biden administration on climate policy, has been very outspoken in her desire to kill the Line 3 expansion. We have senior members of this administration who, with close connections to the effort to kill the Line 5 that delivers most of the energy to Michigan and southern Ontario. If retroactively rescinding a presidential permit for a pipeline border crossing is validated, if today's decision is validated, if there is no pushback from Canada's government, I think it merely encourages those organizations to turn to use this tactic in their effort to landlock Canadian energy. So, in fact, I raised this with the Prime Minister yesterday, and he agreed with me that this would create a very troubling precedent. That seemed to register with him, and I believe he is aware of the catastrophic impact on Ontario's economy of potentially decommissioning Line 5. And so if he understands that, I would ask him to act accordingly.
Thank you. Operator, will you please put through the next question?
Lauren Gardner, Politico.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Premier, I'm wondering if you could get into a little more detail. What exactly do you expect the Prime Minister to do when it comes to engaging on Keystone XL, given that this was a long-standing campaign promise? The President signed an executive order on this today, and the Prime Minister's own statement today said he was disappointed, but acknowledged this was a campaign promise, and then this outlined other areas where the Canadian government wants to work with the American government.
Thank you, Laura. I would point out again that former President Trump had, as a much more central campaign promise, ripping up the NAFTA agreement and imposing steel and aluminum tariffs on imports to the United States. Canada did not accept or respect or merely express disappointment at those campaign pledges and policies. Canada, quite rightly under Prime Minister Trudeau's leadership, fought to defend this country's vital economic interests against those election campaign commitments of the last president. I can't understand why the Canadian government would go to the wall with strong language, not respecting or accepting the aluminum or steel tariffs, but immediately imposing countervailing tariffs on the United States. Why would the federal government do that when we have at most a few $1 billion of aluminum and steel exports to the United States, but would take no similar measure to defend a $90 billion export industry, Canadian energy, shipped to the United States, which employs directly and indirectly hundreds of thousands of Canadians, the largest sector of the Canadian economy. So, to say that this was a campaign commitment, so too have been previous American protectionist policies that were strongly fought by national Canadian governments of different partisan stripes. Just because a foreign government gets elected on a promise to hurt our economic interests does not mean we can or should accept the damage inflicted by foreign government policies. In terms of what do I expect the Prime Minister to do? Well, he and I have discussed this a number of times in recent months, which is that if a Biden administration were to be elected, this federal government would hope to have as a priority a meaningful dialogue about finding a common path forward for North American energy and environmental policy, with a particular emphasis on climate policy. And I believe it is still the intention of this federal government to do that. This federal government has, I think, quite close alignment with the new U.S. administration on many aspects of environmental and climate policy. My point is that we should make those discussions, within the context of those discussions, energy infrastructure, including Keystone XL, must be part of that discussion. And here's my point, Laura. Perhaps there's only a faint hope of this, But I absolutely respect the new president. Despite this insulting action today, we remain friends of the United States. We must find a way forward. And I would hope that we could do so respectfully in the context of a broader policy discussion about North American action on climate and environmental policy. Because I think if we were to sit down with the Biden administration and demonstrate the enormous and continued progress on reducing carbon intensity from the Canadian oil sands, the technological improvements and safety improvements in the actual TC KXL proposal since it was first made a decade ago, the involvement of First Nations, the strong support of unions, the commitments to net zero production by most of our oil sands producers, the new climate targets of the Government of Canada. What I'm saying is that surely the new administration owes Canada the respect to sit down and hear that case and how KXL can fit within that policy.
Thank you. Operator, could you please put through the next question?
Rick Bell, Calgary Sun.
Good afternoon, Premier. I'll just put this bluntly. What leads you to believe that Trudeau will actually do anything of a game-changing nature on this file? Because I think I'm echoing the views of many Albertans of all political stripes in thinking that they would be very surprised if he actually did anything really significant on this file to push Keystone at this point across the finish line. And let us just say, if he does nothing, which is probably the majority opinion today, what do you do then?
Well, Rick, first of all, I acknowledge that the Prime Minister has publicly and clearly supported the Keystone XL project in his recent remarks. And as he says, he did several years ago when he was in opposition. His former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Champagne, said that this was at the top of the bilateral agenda. In my discussion with the new Foreign Minister, Marc Garneau, this week, he said to me that, quotes, we are in lockstep, Alberta and Canada, on this project. So those are the kinds of statements that we have heard publicly and that I have received privately. And so you can imagine my surprise over the past 90 minutes as I've read comments coming from Ottawa from Minister Garneau, who I like and respect, saying that we should, quotes, understand and respect the decision, and from Ambassador Hillman, who operates under directions from Ottawa, saying, quotes, we will accept this decision and move forward. And then the statement issued by the Prime Minister within the last hour, doing nothing more than expressing disappointment. Those words are not consistent with what they have been saying, and they certainly are not consistent with the way in which this government, this federal government, stood up for Canadian aluminum and steel workers, how they stood up for the entire Canadian economy against Trump's campaign commitment to kill NAFTA. So Albertans, I guess, are right to be skeptical, but I am pleading with the Government of Canada to do the right thing for hundreds of thousands of workers, to think about those 2,000 union workers being sent home with pink slips right now, the tens of thousands of others who were expecting and hoping to benefit from employment. You know what I said to the Prime Minister yesterday when we spoke, when I pleaded with him to call then President-elect Biden on this directly? I said, you know, Prime Minister, if this project gets done, Alberta, we estimate, will generate $30 billion in additional provincial revenues over the next 20 years. And I said billions more for the national government. I said, if you want this province to be able to continue to contribute to the rest of the country, we need to get things like this built. He said, I understand that. Well, I appreciate the words, but now we need to see actions. And obviously, Rick, if we don't see those actions, if we don't see the same seriousness about this issue that we did on aluminum and steel tariffs and other sectors attacked by American protectionism, then that will only impel us to go further, force us to go further in our fight for a fair deal in the Federation.
Thank you. Operator, will you please put through the next caller?
Thank you. David Staples, Edmonton Journal.
Hi, Premier. I believe that in the last budget document, it said that if we get 2 out of 3 major pipelines built, Line 3, TMX, and Keystone XL, that we won't have a pipeline crunch. So this one is in doubt, Keystone. How confident are you that TMX is going to be built? And how important now, based on fears the United States may be going in a different direction with oil and gas, is it important? How important is it to get this oil over to Asian markets?
Very important. Look, I remain cautiously optimistic about Trans Mountain. As I've said before, the BC government has effectively accepted it as a fait accompli and is continuing to permit it. We are down now to a small handful of First Nations out of 129 that are actively opposed to the project. And public opinion has shifted in a supportive direction in British Columbia and elsewhere. All of that, I think, bodes well for continued progress. We continue to win. When I say we, Enbridge continues to win, and really indirectly the Canadian energy sector continues to win critical regulatory challenges against the Line 3 expansion, which is one of the 3 projects to which you've referred. And so if the rule of law prevails, we believe that we should see the expanded Line 3 commissioned and delivering an additional more than 300,000 barrels to U.S. markets by roughly this time next year. What I find so troubling about today's decision is that it undermines our confidence in the predictability of the American regulatory system. And there are people now working in the White House who I believe may very well counsel the president to use on other pipelines the power that he used today. That is, look, Chris, it's one of the, Dave, that's one of the reasons, David, that we made the investment in Keystone XL, because our view was Alberta should take an all of the above strategy, pursue every possible pipeline to be as assertive as we can in all of this. And I believe we were right to do so in Keystone XL, but it does underscore the importance of getting those other projects done for sure.
Thank you. We have time for 3 more questions. Operator, will you please put through the next question?
Robert Tuttle, Bloomberg News.
Yes, hi, Premier. You said earlier that you were considering to recoup some of the loss selling off pipe and other assets. How long are you going to wait before you'll actually do that? It sounds like you want to take some other actions ahead of time.
Well, I did consult with our partners in this project at TC Energy this afternoon, and none of us are going to rush into making any improvised decisions here. We're going to take our time, do a close legal analysis of the actual wording of the executive order signed by the President today. And again, we'll urge the federal government to not take this off the table, but put it at the center of the table in the bilateral relationship. If they decide to surrender in the defense of Canada's vital economic interests, and we determine that there's no legal avenue to proceed with construction effectively under the permit, then we'll have to, as you know, TC Energy today announced already that they've, in consultation with us, decided to suspend construction indefinitely. That will reduce any potential liability that we might incur for construction in this quarter. And ultimately, a decision may have to be made that we will make in the interest of Alberta taxpayers, TC Energy in the interest of their shareholders, to suspend the project. And if that happens, then there would be liquidation of assets. But that is not our first option. Our first option is, again, for the Canadian federal government to take this as seriously as they would take the defense of the Canadian auto sector or the aviation sector, and to put this back on the table. So that is, and then if ultimately damages are incurred, we will use every legal means at our disposal to seek compensation and to seek legal remedies for those damages. We've already obtained at least 2 legal opinions in that respect, and we do believe that Alberta would have a strong case to make. I'll leave TC Energy to comment on its own in that respect.
Thank you. Operator, will you please put through the next question?
Janet French, CBC.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I was curious whether you would consider any kinds of concessions. If this administration is really interested in pro-climate policies, would you ever consider, withdrawing your suit against a carbon tax or imposing an Alberta carbon tax, anything that might be seeming more palatable?
Well, let me answer it this way. We have imposed a levy on major industrial emissions, and we've had one in Alberta long before any U.S. state did. That's now the $40 levy on major industrial emitters that supports the technology technology innovation and emissions reduction plan. And we have had conversations with the federal government about finding a way forward on a future for our enormous energy industry that also shows continued progress on reducing emissions. And I said to the Prime Minister, Janet, the morning after our government was elected, that I was open to having that conversation with his government, to finding a way forward together. I said that I was willing to discuss with him the 100 megaton emissions cap, a levy, an equivalency agreement on major industrial emissions, on methane, and on so much more. And in fact, we have found some common ground on those issues. And the door remains open. I repeated this to the Prime Minister yesterday. We actually are making very substantial progress with the federal government on advancing a huge potential expansion of carbon capture, utilization, and storage technology that could be a huge game changer for the oil sands. So I think I understand the premise of your question, and the answer is yes, in principle. But we're not on. We obviously have some strong disagreements. One of them will be resolved at the Supreme Court of Canada in the weeks to come on the retail carbon tax. But absolutely, we are prepared to find a way forward, working with the industry, the Government of Canada, and hopefully the Government of the United States for secure a supply of energy in an environmentally responsible way.
Thank you. Operator, will you please put through the final question?
Charlotte Dumoulin, Radio-Canada.
Oui, bonjour, M. Kenney. Merci pour ma question. D'abord, peut-être vous m'expliquer en français, que pensez-vous de la réponse du gouvernement fédéral à ce point-ci et de quel type de sanctions vous parlez? Qu'est-ce que vous aimeriez voir exactement?
OK. Évidemment, la relation entre l'Alberta et les États-Unis, le Canada et les États-Unis est essentielle. Et je félicite le président Biden pour son inauguration aujourd'hui. Et nous hâte à travailler avec la nouvelle administration américaine. Mais cela étant dit, évidemment, on est insulté que l'une des premières actions de son gouvernement a été de effectivement tuer un projet actuel où le gouvernement de l'Alberta est un propriétaire de cet oléoduc parce que ça va tuer milliers des emplois au Canada. Ça va créer un précédent très problématique en ce qui concerne la vente de presque 100 milliards de dollars de produits énergétiques aux États-Unis provenant de l'Alberta et le Canada. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous exigeons que le gouvernement fédéral de M. Trudeau agisse à cet égard. J'espère, tout d'abord, avec les pourparlers de comment le Canada et les États-Unis puissent trouver une politique commune pour l'énergie et l'environnement, y compris l'action sur le climat. Mais si le gouvernement du M. Biden refuse d'accepter ce propos-là, c'est clair qu'il faut le Canada se défendre l'intérêt économique essentiel de notre pays et de notre industrie le plus large, qui est l'industrie énergétique. Et juste comme le Canada a imposé les tarifs pour répondre aux actions de M. Trump sur certaines industries, il faut envoyer un message de clarté qu'on va défendre la plus large industrie au Canada. Il y a plusieurs options à cet égard, des sanctions, mais la faiblesse n'est pas une option, parce que la faiblesse, en réponse aux actions injustes qui nuisent à notre économie, est quelque chose qui va créer un précédent problématique. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.